The Galactic Coalition had conquered hundreds of worlds, and every victory followed the same pattern. Orbital scans identified infrastructure, armored divisions landed on stable terrain, resistance collapsed under precision fire. Doctrine favored visibility, predictability, and control. Earth broke every metric they respected. Vast green masses swallowed continents. No clean cities. No orderly grids. Just heat, rain, and endless vegetation. Coalition analysts classified the planet as a logistical inconvenience rather than a military threat, a wilderness world whose own environment would do most of the work for the invaders. Civilizations that hid inside chaos had always failed. Order crushed disorder. That was the assumption. Earth's jungles were mocked openly in briefing halls. Commanders joked that humans had never truly escaped their primitive origins, clinging to mud and trees while the galaxy mastered the stars. Environmental hostility was interpreted as weakness. A planet that fought its own inhabitants would never defend them. Reports describing human specialization in extreme terrain were flagged as cultural exaggerations, artifacts of old planetary wars that no longer mattered in the age of orbital supremacy. The jungle was something to be cleared, burned, sterilized, and replaced with landing zones. Nothing more. Strategic models predicted rapid collapse once the first waves arrived. Without megastructures to protect, without centralized power hubs to disable, Earth would fold inward. Resistance would scatter, starve, and surrender. The absence of visible fortifications was read as proof of backwardness. Coalition planners preferred enemies who hid behind walls and shields. Those enemies followed rules. Earth appeared to have none. Orbital surveys passed over endless canopy and detected minimal electromagnetic signatures. No massed armor. No shield grids. No planetary defense arrays of note. Human industry was dispersed, inefficient, hidden beneath layers of organic interference. The analysts smiled at that. Dispersion meant weakness. They never considered it meant survival. High-altitude scans struggled to penetrate the living layers below, but the limitations were attributed to sensor calibration errors. Adjustments were ordered. Confidence remained absolute. The jungle itself was never treated as a combat variable. Alien doctrine separated battlefield from environment, soldier from terrain. Weather was a nuisance, not a factor. Vegetation was cover, not concealment. The idea that terrain could think, adapt, or be weaponized was considered archaic. On most worlds, nature had been tamed long before the first shot was fired. Earth, they believed, had failed that evolutionary step. Landing simulations showed manageable resistance at the fringes. Human forces were expected to engage at predictable choke points, roads, rivers, or settlements. There was no consideration given to areas without paths, without maps, without logic. Places where machines could not move easily, where sensors would lie, where silence mattered more than firepower. Coalition forces planned to advance in clean lines, cutting through foliage with plasma sweeps and atmospheric suppression. The jungle would burn, and what remained would kneel. Political pressure accelerated the timetable. A swift victory over Earth would reinforce coalition authority after recent border disputes. The operation was framed as a demonstration, not a war. Minimal casualties. Minimal resistance. A lesson delivered to a stubborn species that had refused integration terms. Human objections were dismissed as emotional posturing. No species had ever defended a world like Earth successfully. Not against the coalition. The invasion order was signed without debate. Command channels echoed with certainty. Environmental countermeasures were deemed unnecessary. Specialized units were reassigned elsewhere. The jungle did not warrant them. Standard armored legions would suffice. The final briefing summarized Earth in a single line: technologically capable, strategically irrelevant. As the fleets aligned in orbit and drop coordinates were finalized, no one questioned why a species so dismissed had survived so long on such a hostile world. No one asked why humans never cleared their jungles, never conquered them, never replaced them with order. The coalition assumed neglect. They mistook coexistence for weakness. Authorization was given. descent vectors locked. The jungles waited, unchanged, indifferent, and very familiar with war. The first landings met no resistance, and that absence reassured the coalition more than any victory could have. Dropships settled into cleared zones carved by orbital fire, their hulls steaming in the wet heat. The air was thick, heavy, pressing against armor seals. Sensors struggled to normalize temperature readings, jumping wildly between extremes. Command logs blamed humidity saturation. Engineers adjusted parameters and moved on. The jungle stood silent, intact beyond the scorched circles, watching. Advance columns pushed outward, immediately slowed by terrain that refused to behave. Soil collapsed under armored weight. Roots twisted around mechanized joints. Vehicles designed for planes and cities bogged down in sucking mud that reformed seconds after being displaced. Cutting beams burned paths forward, but foliage fell only to rise again, aggressive growth closing gaps overnight. What should have been permanent clearance became temporary inconvenience. Plasma sweeps ignited massive fires that were expected to spread uncontrollably. Instead, rain came. Sudden, violent, relentless. Fire drowned in minutes. Smoke clung low, blinding optics and choking air intakes. Thermal sensors filled with noise as living heat overwhelmed targeting algorithms. Every recalibration created new errors. The jungle refused to stay reduced to data. Drones were deployed in swarms, sent ahead to map movement corridors. At first, telemetry streamed in normally. Then feeds cut out one by one. No explosions. No debris signatures. Just loss. Command assumed canopy interference and ordered replacements. Those vanished faster. Recon officers marked zones as sensor denied and flagged them for later analysis. Troops advanced anyway. Communication relays struggled to maintain cohesion. Short-range transmissions echoed strangely, distorted by dense vegetation and mineral-rich soil. Long-range signals fractured during storms that arrived without warning. Units were forced into tighter formations, closer proximity, slower movement. The jungle dictated pace, not command. Soldiers began to feel watched, though instruments showed nothing. It started with delays. Convoys arriving hours late. Patrols missing check-ins by minutes, then hours, then never. A mechanized platoon sent to secure a ridge reported heavy resistance from terrain alone, then went silent. Recovery teams found scorched armor shells half buried in vegetation, power cores intact, weapons unfired. No bodies. No blood. No signs of battle. Reports labeled the losses as environmental accidents. Sound became unreliable. Footsteps echoed where nothing stood. Movement registered on motion sensors, then vanished when tracked. Leaves shifted against the wind's direction. Insects swarmed exposed interfaces, clogging vents and seams. Soldiers sealed armor tighter, worsening heat buildup. Fatigue accelerated. Sleep cycles fractured. The jungle never rested. Cleared zones were reclaimed with unsettling speed. What had been bare earth at dusk was thick undergrowth by dawn. Roots cracked through hardened plating left unattended. Supply caches vanished under moss and vine. Markers used for navigation were swallowed whole. Maps became obsolete within hours of creation. The environment erased evidence of progress without effort. High Command dismissed frontline reports as inexperience. Reinforcements were ordered deeper, faster. Aggression would solve hesitation. Standard procedure dictated overwhelming force when uncertainty appeared. Columns were pushed beyond support range, instructed to flush out whatever disrupted operations. No enemy formations were identified, but the absence itself became provocation. Casualty lists grew, categorized under malfunction, exposure, misadventure. Commanders noticed a pattern they refused to name. Losses occurred without combat records. Engagement logs showed no hostile fire. The jungle was killing efficiency without killing openly. Morale degraded quietly, replaced by tension that no briefing addressed. By the 7th rotation, a field officer submitted a sealed report stating the environment behaved like an opposing force. The document was archived without response. Coalition doctrine had no category for landscapes that fought back. As columns advanced deeper into green silence, the jungle closed behind them, and the invasion timetable began to slip beyond all acceptable margins. The change was not announced by alarms or explosions but by precision. A patrol vanished between heartbeats, tracked until the moment it ceased to exist. Sensors recorded pressure shifts, brief heat ghosts, then nothing. Command demanded contact reports. Survivors returned shaken, weapons untouched, memories fractured by fear alone and silent. Armor failures followed patterns impossible to ignore. Joints locked exactly when weight shifted. Power packs drained without alerts. Targeting reticles slid away from motion. Traps were not crude, they were intimate, tuned to alien physiology. Someone studied manuals, tested limits, then struck invisibly at night, without warning or mercy ever. No attacker was seen, yet attacks synchronized across kilometers. Units collapsed in sequence, isolated by timing rather than firepower. Those who fled found paths altered, landmarks erased. Retreat became advance into worse ground. The jungle guided movement, funneling prey toward silence prepared long before landings by human design alone always. Recovered footage showed flashes of figures dissolving into foliage. Heat signatures mimicked animals, then vanished. Sound traps misled squads into ambush zones where nothing waited except loss. Weapons fired wildly, revealing positions. The unseen answered with calm removal, leaving equipment arranged, messages etched without words into soil, vines, and shade. Coalition medics reported survivors with intact bodies and broken resolve. They spoke of breathing walls, of eyes everywhere, of time stretching thin. Sleep became impossible. Every shadow implied pursuit. Veterans requested extraction, citing ancestral terrors. Requests were denied, reinforcing certainty that something hunted with intent beyond doctrine, rank, logic, comprehension. Capture technology disappeared from depots overnight, reappearing modified against its makers. Frequencies were inverted, safeties bypassed, materials repurposed. Enemy tools became human extensions. The pace of adaptation outstripped updates. Algorithms lagged hours behind reality. Each correction created vulnerabilities immediately exploited again with patience, skill, and ruthless economy of motion everywhere. Command finally acknowledged organized resistance without formations. Analysts struggled to label it. Guerrilla implied desperation, this was dominance. The enemy chose when to touch the battlefield. Silence replaced bombardment. Movement slowed to survival speed. Orders lost meaning when terrain delivered consequences faster than authority could respond ever, again, anywhere, reliably. Names emerged from whispers, jungle special forces. No insignia, no broadcasts, no ranks visible. They were inferred through absence. They fought by not fighting, by letting mistakes mature. Every step punished assumptions. Every pause increased danger. Mastery looked effortless because preparation was invisible to invaders, observers, commanders, analysts, systems alike. Fear propagated faster than losses. Units froze, then fractured. The jungle became a partner to human intent, shaping outcomes quietly. Soldiers learned the truth too late. Superiority meant nothing without relevance. The hunters did not chase, they waited. Waiting won every exchange across time, space, terrain, doctrine, morale, courage, will. By the time reports aligned, the pattern was complete. Engagements occurred only on human terms. Losses mounted without battles. Control dissolved without explosions. The jungle taught a lesson older than empires. Those who cannot read ground will be written out by it slowly, precisely, repeatedly, without mercy, witnesses, excuses, appeal. Coalition veterans compared the experience to extinction wars they barely survived. This was worse. There was no front to brace against. Courage had nowhere to stand. The enemy owned time itself, stretching minutes into traps. Survival depended on permission never granted by humans, jungle, weather, darkness, silence, patience, planning, inevitability. Attempts to adapt failed as quickly as they formed. New tactics were anticipated, countered, absorbed. Learning curves bent toward humans. Training doctrines collapsed under live conditions. The realization spread quietly: the invaders were not fighting soldiers. They were fighting an ecosystem that fought back intelligently, deliberately, endlessly, without exhaustion, remorse. Section briefings ended with a forbidden conclusion. Victory was no longer calculable. The jungle had teeth, and humans were the bite. What remained was endurance, measured in dread. As night fell again, movement ceased, and somewhere unseen, patience smiled without sound: light, mercy, error, haste, weakness, doubt, relief, hope, escape. Coalition High Command refused to accept the implications of the reports. Failure was attributed to localized incompetence, not systemic collapse. New commanders were rotated in, carrying the same doctrine with sharper voices and harsher deadlines. Reinforcements arrived in force, swelling numbers without improving control. The jungle absorbed them without distinction. More bodies meant more confusion, more signals to intercept, more mistakes to harvest. Command chains fractured under pressure. Orders took too long to arrive, and when they did, conditions had already changed. Units received contradictory instructions within the same cycle. Some were told to advance, others to hold, others to retreat through terrain no longer navigable. Authority depended on clarity. The jungle erased clarity completely. Officers began acting independently, breaking centuries-old discipline protocols simply to stay alive. Supply failures became strategic disasters. Drop zones were compromised before cargo hit the ground. Automated logistics were rerouted by falsified terrain data seeded into coalition networks. Fuel, ammunition, and medical supplies ended up kilometers from intended recipients, or vanished entirely. Humans were not just fighting soldiers. They were dismantling the system that kept those soldiers functional. Attempts to reassert dominance through escalation backfired. Heavy bombardments destroyed nothing of value and revealed orbital firing patterns. Human operators exploited those patterns to time movements perfectly, slipping through devastation untouched. The more force the coalition applied, the more predictable it became. Predictability was fatal. The jungle punished repetition without mercy. Coalition artificial intelligence systems degraded rapidly. They relied on stable variables, clean inputs, repeatable behavior. Earth offered none. Data sets contradicted themselves within hours. Models collapsed under noise. Each update lagged behind human adaptation, and every lag created exploitable gaps. Analysts watched simulations fail faster than they could be rebuilt. The machines designed to win wars became spectators to their own irrelevance. Psychological collapse followed logistical failure. Soldiers stopped trusting sensors, then stopped trusting command. Rumors replaced briefings. Fear outranked protocol. Some units abandoned positions without orders, slipping into the jungle in blind attempts to escape. None were recovered. Desertion became common enough that high command stopped reporting it accurately, masking the scale of disintegration. Human strikes expanded outward, no longer limited to harassment. Landing zones were neutralized hours before use. Command nodes went dark simultaneously across entire regions. Coalition coordination collapsed into isolated pockets that could not support one another. Humans never held ground. They erased the enemy's ability to function on it. Territory became meaningless when survival itself was uncertain. Political consequences erupted across the galaxy. Leaked footage showed elite coalition troops pleading for extraction from a planet officially listed as secure. Rival powers questioned coalition dominance openly for the first time in centuries. Allies hesitated. Neutral systems reconsidered treaties. Earth's jungle became a symbol not of resistance, but of humiliation. High Command debated the unthinkable. Orbital sterilization was raised, then quietly abandoned. Earth's retaliation capacity was unknown, and precedent mattered. A galaxy that normalized annihilation invited it in return. For the first time, the coalition hesitated not out of compassion, but fear of consequence. Internal reports reached a forbidden conclusion. The campaign could not be won without abandoning core doctrine. Adaptation required decentralization, patience, and surrendering control, traits the coalition did not possess. The jungle had exposed a flaw no enemy ever had. The strength of the coalition was rigidity. Against Earth, rigidity was collapse. A ceasefire proposal was drafted in secrecy, stripped of language implying authority. It was transmitted without demand, without threat. Notably, it was sent through channels humans had never jammed. When confirmation came, it was brief and delayed, deliberate in its restraint. The jungle grew quiet, not because the war was over, but because humanity had decided it had taught enough for now. The response from Earth arrived without ceremony, transmitted in plain language stripped of dominance. No threats, no demands, no victory claims. Just terms. The coalition accepted them immediately. Fleets withdrew on fixed schedules, escorted not by force but by silence. As ships lifted from the jungle's edge, nothing pursued them. No farewell fire. No parting blow. The absence unsettled survivors more than any attack had. On the ground, the pressure vanished. Sensors cleared. Communication stabilized. Soldiers realized they were being allowed to leave. That truth carried weight. They were not driven out by exhaustion or defeat alone. They were dismissed. The jungle released them the way a predator releases prey that no longer matters. Human operatives were never seen departing. They did not assemble, celebrate, or announce completion. Equipment vanished back into the green. Modified alien technology was dismantled or buried, reclaimed by soil and root. Evidence dissolved. The battlefield returned to what it had always been, alive, layered, indifferent. It looked untouched to orbit, as if nothing had happened at all. During negotiations, the coalition finally learned what it had fought. Earth explained without pride. Humanity trained for environments others feared. Not as punishment, but as preparation. Deserts, oceans, ice, radiation, vacuum. Jungles were only one classroom. Where other civilizations reshaped worlds to suit doctrine, humans reshaped doctrine to survive worlds as they were. The jungle was never a shield. It was a partner. Humans did not dominate it, they listened. They learned patterns, rhythms, limits. They accepted discomfort as cost, uncertainty as advantage. Every vine, insect, shadow became information. Every weakness the environment imposed was one the enemy would share, magnified by unfamiliarity. That was the lesson the coalition had missed. Earth revealed that no conventional armies had been deployed. No planetary mobilization. No full-spectrum response. Specialists had been enough. The implication settled heavily across diplomatic chambers. If this was restraint, escalation was unthinkable. The galaxy recalculated Earth overnight. Treaties followed. Earth's sovereignty was formally recognized, including its wilderness zones. No extraction rights. No terraforming claims. No military presence. The jungle was declared a restricted environment under interstellar law, a classification previously reserved for unstable stars and living superweapons. Humans did not object. Across the galaxy, military academies rewrote doctrine. Terrain was no longer background. Environments were studied as actors. Simulations incorporated chaos, denial, adaptation. None succeeded. Earth's methods resisted replication. They were too cultural, too patient, too human. Technology alone could not bridge the gap. Veterans carried the experience home in fragments. They spoke of fear without an enemy, of nights that listened back, of being reduced to noise inside a system that did not care. Empires had fallen before, but never so quietly. Never to something that did not announce itself as conqueror. Earth did not expand. It did not posture. It returned to routine. Forests grew. Rain fell. Life continued. The galaxy watched a world that could have demanded tribute choose instead to remain still. That restraint frightened rivals more than any show of force. The lesson spread without broadcast. Power did not belong to the largest fleet or brightest weapon. It belonged to those who could endure where others unraveled, who could disappear when searched for, who could wait longer than fear. Humanity had not won a war. It had corrected an assumption. Civilizations that mistook wilderness for weakness adjusted their charts. Those that did not faded from relevance. Earth's jungles remained where they had always been, vast and patient, holding secrets that would never be shared willingly. The galaxy learned, too late, that humanity did not conquer nature. Humanity survived it. And anything that survived that long had already learned how to win.